statues which we have from him. They're very vivid and tend to present an image of the king as possibly taking the role of kingship very seriously, interested in presenting his image as a wise and careful ruler who is really concerned with maintaining the strength of the kingship.
His name meant man of power, but he was unlike earlier pharaohs whose portraits portrayed them as gods. The statues we have of the pharaoh Sesostris III depict a natural and realistic face.
Sesostris III is very much remembered as a pharaoh who had a strong interest in the military, and particularly his activities in Nubia testify to his interest in extending the power of Egypt and maintaining its borders.
During his reign, Sesostris III extended and expanded a system of mud brick fortresses which the Egyptians had established in Lower Nubia, now northern Sudan. From here he could acquire building materials and extend the influence of Egypt into this frontier.
The area of Upper Nubia during that time was the center of a very powerful culture which we know as the Kerma culture. Sesostris III really was interested in maintaining Egypt's border against the Kerma culture.
Much of the wealth he secured during his Nubian campaigns was marked for use in building temples in Egypt. Here in the capital city of Thebes, he erected an elaborate temple which has since been destroyed that was dedicated to the god Mantu, the ancient Egyptian lord of warfare. But such confidence in the gods and in the power of war were impermanent. Within 200 years, the proud people of Egypt would be quietly invaded. Egypt would again become a land of turmoil. There are no monuments to celebrate their rule. No image of their faces has ever been found. Yet ancient writings attest to the fact that in 1663 BC, Egypt came under the control of foreign kings of Semitic origin. These pharaohs were called the Hyksos.
We don't know the exact process by which the Hyksos took over the country. It appears at the moment that possibly it was partly by infiltrating into the delta and increasing their numbers. There may also have been an actual invasion component, although this is still somewhat debated.
If it was invasion, the Hyksos swept across the land, bringing with them superior weaponry like the compound bow. They would also introduce the horse and the chariot to Egypt. The ancients called these horse-drawn vehicles the ships that sailed upon the desert. There is evidence that the Hyksos used these to plunder the cultural and political center of Egypt, Memphis. The result was the 16th dynasty, a dynasty of foreign rule for Egypt that lasted 108 years.
They didn't like this. It caused a profound impact on the Egyptian psyche. And when the Egyptians roared back with control of their country, they seem to have driven the Hyksos out with what I can best characterize as a never again attitude. They did not like being controlled by foreigners, and they did not want it to happen again.
With the foreign kings expelled, the Egyptians looked within their borders and witnessed the start of a new kingdom. It would begin here in the ancient city of Thebes. The pharaohs of the new kingdom were indeed godlike beings. Their immense monuments and temples have left an imprint on the face of Egypt that has survived for 3 millennia. This new kingdom marked the beginning of the 18th dynasty, or family line of pharaohs. It started in 1570 BC with the pharaoh Ahmose, A mosaic from his time depicts him in a ritual bath or purification ceremony. It is Ahmose who is credited with sealing Egypt's borders with Syria and Nubia to keep the country safe from invaders. Evidence of his military leadership is recorded on his ceremonial gold battle axe, which depicts him smiting his enemy. Although Ahmose's tomb was plundered for the treasures that would have been stored inside, his mummy has remained intact. This gives us the unique opportunity to look upon the face of the pharaoh who stood at the beginning of Egypt's new kingdom, the pharaoh Ahmose. The face of a successor, Thutmose I, has also survived in its mummified form. Thutmose I would come to rule Egypt in the year 1535 BC. Although his reign was short and lasted only 6 years, the pharaoh Thutmose I is credited with a set of brilliant military campaigns that pushed the southern frontier of Egypt farther into the mineral-rich lands of Nubia than any pharaoh before him. The name Thutmose meant born of the god of Thoth, a tribute to the Egyptian lord of the moon and wisdom. Before his death in 1518 BC, after a reign of only 6 years, Thutmose passed his royal name on to his son. He would be called Thutmose II. The Egyptian royal families were the only Egyptians to encourage marriage between brother and sister. In this way, they kept their royal bloodline and their right to the throne safely within the family. For this reason, Thutmose II married his half-sister. She was called Hatshepsut, a name that meant foremost of noble ladies. Thutmose II and Hatshepsut would rule as king and queen for 14 years. As a pharaoh, he was only a shadow of the powerful man his father had been. The reign of Thutmose II was mostly uneventful. When he died at the age of 30, his death left a great problem for the royal family. The only eligible male heir he had fathered was a young boy not yet 12 years old. The boy's mother was a harem girl named Isis. The boy would be named Thutmose III.
It was this individual, who was, of course, the nephew of Hatshepsut, who had the closest claim to the throne as the most immediate male heir of the deceased king. However, apparently because he was fairly young, Hatshepsut was able to have herself installed as a regential figure and to rule in a co-regency with him for over 2 decades.
But after 2 years as co-regent with the boy Thutmose III, Queen Hatshepsut had herself crowned pharaoh. In 1498 BC, she became ruler of Egypt, the richest and most powerful country on earth. Nestled in the foothills below the cliffs of Dar el-Bahari, near ancient Thebes, stands a masterpiece. This is the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. She called it the garden of my father Amun, who was the most powerful god in Thebes. It was indeed an elegant garden. Trees and green shrubs once lined its graceful entrance ramps, and there is evidence that its colonnade and sanctuary shared the same adornment. More than a temple, however, it was a propaganda machine that Hatshepsut used to underscore her right to the throne. On its walls, she had inscribed scenes that depict her father, Thutmose I, who was long dead, installing her as king.
Many of the scenes we have from Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari present in kind of very idealized ways the nature of her kingship and really attempt to strengthen her claim. So this text that we have is not an historical document, but a document which was essentially fabricated by Hatshepsut in order to strengthen her claim to the kingship.
At the Temple of Karnak, she consolidated her power through worship with the priests of the Temple of Amun. These were powerful priests because it was believed that the strength of the pharaoh emanated from this god. Although such ritual ceremonies were closed to women, as pharaoh, Hatshepsut could enter the inner domain of the god. Outside the temple, she commissioned the building of a spectacular obelisk to commemorate her relationship with the god of the sun. Although she was not noted as a military leader, Queen Hatshepsut is noted for her trading expeditions to a land called Punt, now modern Somalia. Such affairs were administered for the pharaoh Hatshepsut by a common man named Snefru. Snefru seemed to have been at Hatshepsut's side for much of her life, and statues of him depict him carefully holding or teaching Hatshepsut's daughter, the Princess Neferu. In Snefru's time, close connections like these led to rumors suggesting that he owed his good fortune to intimate relations with the queen. Off to the side and deep below Hatshepsut's temple complex, Snefru built his tomb. The fact that it was constructed so close to the queen's temple is another factor that fuels the speculation about their possible love affair. The pharaoh Hatshepsut died in 1483 BC, but any records of her demise seem to have been mysteriously destroyed. Some speculate that Thutmose III, the boy she had kept from the throne, had a hand in her death. What we do know is that he hated her. Now he would try to destroy her spirit. He waited nearly 20 years to take his rightful place as the pharaoh of all of Egypt. For nearly 20 years he was kept in the background, appearing to worship the queen who had usurped him. This was Thutmose III, the boy who had inherited the throne only to see it taken from him by his caretaker, Queen Hatshepsut. With the death of Queen Hatshepsut, Thutmose III came into his rightful inheritance. In 1504 BC, he would become the celebrated pharaoh of Egypt's 18th dynasty. During the time that the young Thutmose had been kept in the background under the rule of Hatshepsut, he probably went through military training, and like other noblemen in his time, learned how to shoot a bow and arrow and how to handle a chariot in the desert terrain. By the second year of his reign, his military prowess became evident. Records from this time chronicle a period of 18 years, during which Thutmose III led a series of battles and campaigns along the coast of Syria. These won him great riches and has led historians to compare him to Napoleon.
Thutmose is called the Napoleon of Egypt because he was one of the most successful military figures in the history of Egyptian kingship. He directed a whole series of major campaigns, many, many more than most pharaohs, in the Levant and in the Eastern Mediterranean, and he was directly involved in a great deal of those himself.
Of the many temples that were embellished and expanded with the spoils of Thutmose III's military campaigns, none was more dazzling than the work he did at the Temple of Karnak in the ancient city of Thebes. At the east end of the complex, Thutmose III would construct his festival temple. Unique in the design of Egyptian temples, its unusually shaped columns are thought to represent the poles of his military tent. The other walls and columns here were shaped and carved to represent the variety of animals and plants that the pharaoh brought back from his campaign in Syria. A prolific builder, Thutmose III was also a determined destroyer. Within 20 years of Queen Hatshepsut's death, he and an army of followers descended upon everything that bore her name or likeness and destroyed it. Thutmose III, it seems, was furious that this woman had usurped his place on the throne, and now he would retaliate. The statues in her temple were destroyed. Some were beheaded, while others were simply smashed. Her face was chiseled out of wall reliefs anywhere they could be found. Records of her time on the throne were obliterated. Even statues of her chief officer and companion, Senenmut, were not above defacement. This was the ancient equivalent of a book burning. By eliminating her image and name, the pharaoh Thutmose III believed he could eliminate her memory and even eliminate her soul. During this period, the 18th dynasty pharaohs had never fully beheld one of the greatest monuments ever built by their culture. Now more than 1,000 years old, the Great Sphinx built at Giza had literally been covered by the sands of time. It was a new pharaoh, Thutmose IV, who would free the sand-obstructed Sphinx during his first year of reign in 1419 BC. His story is recorded on a giant tablet that still rests between the paws of this great desert beast.
What we see here is a reproduction of the Great Sphinx tablet. The inscription on the tablet begins here in the upper right and gives the date when it was set up in the king's reign. And then it recounts an extraordinary event that took place in his life. Further down here, where the king went out one day in order to hunt ostriches and lions in the desert beyond the pyramids. And taking a break from his hunting out in the western desert, he decided to take a nap underneath the shadow of the head of the Sphinx.
Napping in the shadow of the Sphinx, the king reported a vision in which the great beast spoke to him.
Look at me, Thutmose, my son. I am your father in the horizon. I promise you a gift, earthly rule at the head of all the living. All the territory on which the eye of the sun rests will be yours. To you I turn my face and heart for protection, since I am sick in all my limbs. The sands of the holy place upon which I rest have covered me.
And if you take care of my image, clear it away, tidy it up, and build a small shrine to it, then I shall cause you to become not only a king of Egypt, but one of the greatest kings that Egypt has known.
Thutmose IV reigned over a stable and prosperous Egypt for 33 years. But it was the sand-clearing operation he carried out here that seems to have been his greatest achievement. What followed was a time of opulence. For 100 years, Egypt would bask in an abundance of gold and riches. The ancient Egyptians would witness an outpouring of artistic talent and devotion to a pantheon of gods. But in the midst of this period of peace and ostentation, Egypt would be plunged into a crisis. It began under a strangely distorted figure of a man who would soon rise to power as pharaoh. When our story continues, find out who this pharaoh really was and how he came to be called a heretic. Discover the intrigue of Cleopatra, the pharaoh who was also a seductress, and how she met her tragic end. Gaze upon the face of the pharaoh who built the most elaborate temples the world has ever seen. Walk among the men and women of Egypt who were the greatest pharaohs.